industrial town, but not really all that important politically or religiously. This is a contrast to what we saw at Pergamum, where that is such an astounding altar to Zeus that it's imitated, in Rome. Rome copies Pergamum, and so it's not that important. It's specialized in dyed wool. That's what it was. It was an industrial town. Not all that different from this area. Once upon a time, there used to be several mills in the area. Some of my retirees that I visit, their pensions are through mills that no longer exist here in the valley. Dyed wool was their big export here. Of course, especially the hardest color to dye in the ancient world was what? Purple. Purple. That was their specialty. Okay. However, it is patronized by the god Apollo. That's the sort of overarching case, sweetheart. That's the overarching deity that you're going to be dealing with in Theatra. Why Apollo? What is Apollo the patron of?
God of the sun, right?
Yep. God of the sun.
Music.
Mm-hmm. Keep going.
Is he medicine? No.
Nope.
Give that away.
Yeah. That's Asclepius. Asclepius. Sorry.
Sun.
You're on the right track with me.
I know. What is he also?
I would think it'd be something to do with the stars because the Apollo space mission.
Yeah.
Wasn't that?
Oh yeah. He's the heavens. Yeah, for lack of a better word. So the sun dominates up there. So that's that's kind of the architecture of the ancient world. They're in their mind that the sun dominates the dome, and the dome is the realm that he's in charge. Yeah, absolutely. Elizabeth, you crochet, don't you?
Weaving?
Go ahead.
Weaving?
The crafts, the arts in general. So that's why if you're an industrial town and you're producing dyed wool for the empire, that makes sense to have him be your patron. Here is some remains from Theatra today, and you see right here in the near ground something that could be used as a baptistry. Probably was not, because what you or if it was, it's disconnected from whatever it was, because the Romans liked their water clean when they bathed, and so there was usually moving water through it, although poor domiciles would not have running water through it. The way you got clean water is you change the water out, so it could have been used as a baptistry. That's why I wanted to have that picture. All right, so what we're going to do is change over to our video on Theatra.
I'm not thinking about it myself.
Can you change our source?
I remember how to do that.
It's only been a week, 2 weeks. Really?
There you go.
Oh.
Nope.
No.
No.
That's the colors.
There
The
you
colors.
go. There you go.
Okay.
PC.
HDMI 1.
There you go. Ta-da!
Thank you.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. Quite good.
Me too.
Good to meet you and welcome to Patmos. Thank you very much.
While enjoying a Turkish tea on this terrace, I'm diving into the biblical text to understand the origin of the name Jezebel. What kind of threat did this woman represent for the community in Thyatira?
So we have two issues particularly, sexual immorality and food sacrificed to idols. the mixing of eating and sexual immorality was a real problem.
With her influence in the church, Jezebel would spur local Christian artisans and merchants to corrupt themselves by participating in pagan rituals. Can you tell us more about Thyatira?
Yeah, today Thyatira is the city of Akhisar. Again, situated on a very strategic road that connects Izmir with Bursa in Istanbul, and also the crossroad between Bergama and Salithi. So these are the modern names of Pergamum and Sardis. So we see that the road connections that were existing in antiquity are still the tracks of the modern highways in Turkey today. So the topography, the geography doesn't change. And so at this very important road junction then that linked Smyrna and Constantinople in antiquity and Pergamum and Sardis, we have the city of Thyatira. And it developed into a very important fortification town, and then the area around it is very fertile from an agricultural perspective. So it became a great commercial town as well.
Where is Thyatira mentioned in the Bible?
This is only mentioned in the book of Revelation. This is the fourth now of the seven churches. So its position is right in the middle. And so as a result of that, if you count the words in the Greek text of the seven messages, this is the longest one. So it has a very strategic place. And in it also is mention of the other churches. So Jesus is using this particular message to the church in Thyatira as an example to all the other churches. So the message is very important, not only for the seven churches, but for Christians throughout history.
And what is this message about?
So we have a false prophetess by the name of Jezebel, who's in this church. She's a very strong woman who is teaching this message of accommodation. So we have two issues particularly, sexual immorality and food sacrificed to idols. And so they were somewhat connected. So in the ancient world, the restaurants often were at the pagan temples. And the dining areas in these temples were used for a variety of events, even birthday parties, we know this. And so union groups, the ancient trade guilds would have their meetings there as well. So this becomes one of the issues. So what if you are a fuller or a brick mason or whatever, and you belong to this trade guild, and your guild is having the meeting in the pagan temple, and the food that's being consumed has been offered to a pagan god or goddess. As a Christian, can you go to this? Well, Paul, of course, addresses this in 1 Corinthians. So the Corinthians are having the same struggle that we see here in Revelation. And Paul gives the Corinthians instruction. They said, you can eat this meat that would be sacrificed at the temples. So the priests would kill the meat, they would take out the fat, burn it, and then the rest of the carcass of the animal would be sold in the meat market. Paul says this is all right. He said, you know that these gods have no real power in the world. But, he said, if for you to go and sit down and eat at a banquet at a pagan temple, he says, how can you eat at the table of demons and then go and partake of the Lord's Supper at the table of the Lord? He said, you can't mix these. And John says the same thing in Revelation. So the problem is Jezebel is saying, yes, you can do both. You can go to the pagan temple, then you can come to church, partake of the Lord's Supper, and it's all right. So this is the tension we see here in this letter.
So is the main point we're talking about here compromises made on holiness?
Yeah, very much so. And of course, later on in Revelation 18, there's a call to come out of Babylon. And so this call persists through the book of Revelation of separating ourselves. And so Christians throughout the centuries have interpreted this in two ways. One of them is actually physical separation. So you have monks going to the desert, living in monasteries, leaving the world. But I don't think this is what Jesus is talking about here, or what John is talking about, is how do we live in the world in the same way Paul talks about, be in the world but not be of the world. So we come out and we establish a different culture in the midst of the predominant culture. That's a fallen culture in the world, and I think this is what is being discussed here in the letter to Thyatira.
And what are the reproaches made against Jezebel?
Related to eating in pagan temples is sometimes these same couches, they're called a kline, where they would be eating, then there would be sexual fornication taking place in these same places. And so for the Greeks and Romans, immorality was very common. And so the mixing of eating and sexual immorality was a real problem. And again, Jezebel, this woman, he's called this, is advocating that this is all right. And of course, Paul deals with the same thing with the Corinthians, with immorality. And a new teaching that comes from Jesus about being faithful to one wife, to being faithful to one husband, and not to engage in sexual relationships outside of marriage. This was a very revolutionary in the world of the first century.
Was immorality common at these times?
Yes, in the pagan world in which the Christian gospel emerges, sexual immorality was rampant. And so the ethics of the kingdom now are one of the new features of the gospel that's being proclaimed. And the family, within the family of God, and husband and wife and children and faithfulness. So the faithfulness in marriage, of course, the church is called the bride of Christ. And so this relationship of the church to Christ is modeled between husband and wife and the family and the faithfulness. And so this is a revolutionary thinking in terms of sexuality that's now being introduced into the ancient world.
What else do we know about the immoral culture of that period of time? What exactly was it?
We have, for example, in the ancient authors, for example, the Tacitus and Suetonius talking about the sexual habits of the emperors. And it's quite degrading as you read the sexual lives of the leaders of the Roman Empire. And quite shocking, really, in terms of heterosexual, homosexual activities that they were involved with, even with slaves. It's very common, of course, to take advantage of slaves and mistreatment of women and others. So it was very widespread, this type of sexual practices.
There's another woman at this time, Lydia, who's one of the holiest women in the Bible. What can you tell us about her?
Yes, we have two important women in the New Testament from Thyatira, and Lydia was one of these women. She was representing her trade guild, probably in the Roman colony of Philippi, in modern-day northern Greece, the ancient Roman province of Macedonia. And we know there was a synagogue in Thyatira, and she probably was a Gentile who became one of these God-fearers, attracted to the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And here she was now living in Philippi, and at the place of prayer on the Sabbath, and Paul comes there to pray and meets her. And she becomes a very early follower of Jesus in this city, and extends hospitality to Paul and to Silas and to Timothy, and becomes a leader of the church there. So she is the opposite example of this Jezebel figure that we see, a woman who really models hospitality, holiness, and one of the very important early women leaders in the church in the New Testament.
So would you say there's a real contradiction in their presence in the same church?
Yeah, exactly. So you have these two tensions, of course, in the book of Revelation. And of course, the condemnation of Jezebel is not because she's a woman. It's because of the message that she's speaking. And her message that she's been confronted before to repent, and she has not repented of her teaching. And so we see a very strong message to her. Unless she repents, she's going to be put on a bed of suffering and leading possibly even to death. So it's a very strong message against this false prophetess.
How did Lydia become a Christian?
Well, Lydia's meeting of Paul in Philippi is the trigger then there. And as they pray together there at the stream outside of the city, I think Paul sees her as a woman who's seeking after truth. And he begins to share about Jesus and his message, and she becomes a very early follower, or the first follower, not only herself, but her whole household in the city of Philippi to become Jesus followers there.
What exactly was her job?
Prominent trade guilds in the city of Thyatira were the purple dyers. We know that there was a root called the madder root there that yielded a very scarlet type of dye, possibly also working with the purple murex shells that yielded a very intense purple dye. And the Romans used these dyes on their togas. You could tell the status of an individual by how much color they had on their togas. And the emperor's family, they could wear togas and clothing entirely in purple, showing they're the imperial family. And so she was representing her trade guild in a Roman colony where there would be a demand for this type of purple dye.
Can you tell us more about Jezebel?
Jezebel was a Phoenician queen who marries Ahab. And of course, this is the northern kingdom, and Ahab was one of the bad kings of the northern kingdom. And God sent prophet after prophet to call these kings to repentance. They did not listen. Of course, the instructions were not to marry a idolatrous woman like Jezebel, but Ahab did anyway. And of course, one of Jezebel's mission was to kill the prophet Elijah. And she killed many of the other prophets of the Lord. And of course, Elijah had to go into hiding. And then he comes out, and we have a very famous confrontation between the prophet Baal and Elijah on Mount Carmel. And of course, Yahweh, the God of Israel, triumphed in this power confrontation that takes place there. And Jezebel tries all the more to kill him, but unsuccessful to doing that. And so because of her opposition to the prophets, to the covenant promises that God had given Israel, Jezebel becomes this evil queen in the Old Testament, until, of course, finally her end is she's pushed off of a porch in an upper story of a house, and she's eaten by dogs. A horrible end to her life, but she was a very evil woman.
This second chapter also talks about a morning star. What is it supposed to be?
In the church in Thyatira, we have two groups of people. We have the majority group that seem to be following Jezebel, but there is the minority report, the smaller group there that is staying true to the Lord. And so this group is addressed then in the letter as well, that they are supposed to stay firm, constant in their faith to Jesus, and as a result of this, they will receive promises in the eternal kingdom. And this promise of the morning star, I think, is one of the most beautiful of these in Revelation chapters 2 and 3. And again, it goes back to a prophecy of Balaam in the book of Numbers. And he prophesied of a messianic figure, a morning star who is going to come in the future. And so Jesus then represents the fulfilled prophecy of the morning star who is going to come and be the savior of the world.
Does this message in Thyatira have something to tell us about the struggles of being in this world but not from it?
Yeah, the message of Thyatira, I think, is a very relevant one, especially to Western societies today. So as we live in cultures that are increasingly secular, even increasingly anti-Christian in character, as immorality seems to be the common standard that's all around us, is how do we live in culture and be witnesses to those around us and distinguish ourselves? I mean, it's not that we somehow wear different clothes or we act weird, but it's how we behave with our honesty, our truthfulness, our relationships with our spouses, our children. These are what distinguishes us as followers of Jesus, as opposed to followers of the enemy. And so I think this is the real test for us today as believers, to live a life of holiness that shows our love for Jesus Christ.
What is the link with the Nicolaitans?
I think that these three groups, the Nicolaitans, followers of Balaam and of Jezebel, sort of represent the same issue that we're talking about here, of compromise, accommodation, and taking the followers away from a attachment, or the followers of the Lamb, and are directing them to be followers of the beast. Yeah, and I think that's the tension. It's very black and white in Revelation. There's no in between. You know, you're going to follow one or the other. And all through the book there, the prophetic message that John is issuing is to turn away from the false prophecy, the false lifestyle that's being offered, and to follow the Lamb alone.
Do we have other examples in history of some Nicolaitans or groups of that sort?
Church history is full of heretics who have come and introduced false teaching, starting with Paul as he deals with some of these teachings in the pastoral letters, in some of the letters he's addressing. And oftentimes, the practices that these teachers have deals with marriage, you know, of either too permissive attitudes toward marriage, or celibacy or asceticism, things that are not scriptural in terms of normal human relationships. So holiness is not necessarily just not doing something, but it's living a balanced life in faith, and with relationships of course, Jesus sums it up: loving God with all our heart, soul, mind, and strength, and loving our neighbor as ourselves. And I think this is the essence of what the gospel is all about, and the way we should conduct ourselves in the world today.
Do these drifts, these compromises with Scripture, still exist?
In Turkey today, we have the sites of the 7 ecumenical councils that took place in the early church. And beginning with the Council of Nicaea, each one of these dealt with various heresies that we see being reappearing even today in the church. And of course, the first one was Arianism, in the belief that Jesus was not a divine being. And this has been revived in modern times through the Jehovah's Witnesses. So these ancient heresies are still persisting in the church today, and being revived and reborn. And so we must be aware of the false teaching that is out there.
So thoughts on the video?
They mentioned about the Jehovah Witnesses.
Yes.
Exactly what did they mean?
The Jehovah Witnesses, I mean, any place you see that JW and the side of like a blue box, that's a Jehovah Witnesses. I don't even know if they call them churches, what they call them. But the Jehovah Witnesses go door to door as missionaries. In fact, they're required to do that. They are required to put in so many hours per month, or they can be disfellowshipped. Jehovah Witnesses have the highest rate of disfellowship of any religious organization in the United States. They kick people out all the time. But one of their key teachings is this idea that Jesus was not a divine being. So it's just part of the reality for them is that they innovated in the teachings, and they broke from the traditional church. They still use the Bible, but they read it in a very peculiar way, a way that only Americans could come up with to read it, because we're disconnected from all the history and stuff like that. You can't live in places like you just saw in the video and not realize how deep the history is in these places and how much history there is to your own faith. Other things that you noticed in there?
I just thought it interesting with the parallel with the name Jezebel in this compared to Jezebel as the wife that they had, that
Yeah.
just the connection there is one of role, and I'm just wondering whether.
Yeah, and most scholars agree that that's a pseudonym
I was
for
gonna say,
somebody.
I
It's
can
not the
imagine
real
that.
name of the person, but
That's what I was figuring, yeah,
By-
because
by-
of her role she played in this.
yeah, by calling her by that name,
Mhm.
everyone in the community would be forced to recognize the role she was playing.
Yeah, and even to point out, use the word a Jezebel, a person, a particular kind of person, so that there's nothing like
Right.
that one step away from.
And the same way in the two of the previous letters we've seen now, the same thing is done with, comparing one person to Balaam, or one and then the Nicolaitans are specifically addressed for what they're doing wrong, which is probably the follower of a guy named Nicholas, who is a proselyte, not St. Nicholas like we celebrate, obviously. That was many hundreds of years later. But yeah, that idea, you call them by a name that makes clear their role in the community, what they're doing to the community. Balaam, of course, was the prophet who couldn't actually prophesy falsely, even though the king wanted him to, the Ammonite king. Can't remember his name right now, but did tell the Ammonite king how to get the people to be weak enough that they could conquer them, even though he wouldn't prophesy against them. Disclose the weakness. And of course the weakness was, hey, get him to sleep with temple prostitutes. Get him engaged in all this stuff that is exactly parallel to what we see, with what they just covered with Jezebel, the character Jezebel in this letter. Other things from the video. Mm-hmm.
When I see that it says it's to the church, I picture a building like this with all the people that, this is more like to a community than
That's
to
right.
a church.
Yeah,
I guess.
that's right. Yeah, keep talking. I'm just going to write something up here while you do.
Because I can't imagine religious people and Jezebel people combining and being together. It just doesn't make sense.
Well, and that's what you see. This was a very charismatic leader giving an interpretation that swayed a lot of people, because it's a lot easier to go along with the surrounding culture than it is to swim upstream, right? It is. That's why I love in The Chosen, the opening sequence, the opening credits for each episode of The Chosen. It's all these fish, and they're all swimming the same direction, and then one of them will change colors and go the other direction. And that's really what it is. I mean, that's really what it means to be a follower of Christ. Is you're gonna swim upstream, even in cultures that were supposedly Christian. Look at most of the people who are revered as saints through the legalization of Christianity in the 300s through to the modern period, and they're almost always people who most of the professional religious people were dumping on them and fighting them and stuff like this, because they were pushing back against the hierarchy of the church when it was corrupt. They were saying, we see this thing and we don't want to live that way. They're swimming a different direction. It's always difficult if you're going to be a sincere follower of Christ to live that out in an authentic way. A friend of mine reminded me a couple of years ago. He said, Brett, your problem is that you keep getting in trouble with the church because you're a radical. And so the word radical is the same root word as radish. It's rooted. So you're rooted in if you're rooted in Christ, you're gonna come at cross purposes with people who may be a little less rooted or see it differently, and you have to navigate that stuff. The word that we translate as church is the word, depends on how you transliterate it, but I'm going to do it this way, ecclesia, and it means assembly. It doesn't mean building. We tend to associate it with a building because we live on the far side of Christendom, but it's the assembly. So every one of these, to the group that gathers, it would be another way to translate. Instead of to the church at Pergamum, it's the group that gathers in Pergamum. It's the group that gathers in Thyatira. And that's why you can have this fraction in the community. There's these people who are doing one thing and these people who are doing something else. And this revelation from Jesus is siding firmly with one group over the other. I pulled it, I ran to the other room a moment ago to grab my phone. A couple of years ago, 2009, when my old denomination was jumping off of the boat into the cultural waters, a Missouri Synod pastor wrote a really, really funny piece of, what do you call it when you, it's not a spoof, but satire. He wrote a really funny satirical piece using all the rationales that were used to change the teaching on sexual ethics in the old denomination. He used every single one of them to justify temple prostitution, bringing temple prostitution back. It's a really funny thing to read if you like that kind of, if you have a sort of wicked sense of humor. So I pulled it up. And I said, I have it up so I can share it with the group. It's 16 years ago now, but it's really quite funny. But you could see the way that a charismatic person or set of personalities can step by step take you down a road that eventually leads you to be at, if not 180 degrees from where you should be, at least at cross purposes to it, right? One of the speakers that the old denomination loves to trot out at the national youth assemblies is a woman in her own book who celebrates her own abortion, her own divorce, and justifies pornography use. And they think she's cool because they call her the swearing pastor because she curses a lot when she gives presentations to youth. They think this is a great idea. So,
I think I read one of her books.
What's that?
I think I read one of her books.
Probably, yes. She's kind of their rock star that they think is the wave of the future for the church. And she is a very charismatic person. She's a great self-promoter. She understands how to use all the social media stuff to get her message out. But you can see how someone influential like that can shift a perspective one step at a time, justifying the change. That's what I think the satire piece really does well, is show you how, no, it's one little change here, one little change here, and then you end up in this place where we're bringing back temple prostitutes. So,
with the ELCA, I still get their email. And the prayer of intercession, I just look at them because they're radical to me. And this one, where you're to pray for a just and just and equitable church.
Sure.
What exactly does that mean?
Well, and that's you move it, and the early church was that. I mean, the early church was radically, if you would say, to use the language they used, it was radically inclusive of women, right? Women had roles in the church they didn't have in the larger Roman culture. It was inter-ethnic. It was the only organization in the ancient world was inter-ethnic, apart from the trade guilds. Otherwise, you stuck to your own in the Roman Empire, right? Your group and their group and everything else like that. And so it was radically inclusive in that way. And slaves and masters, right? When you came to the communion, slaves and masters were equal. It was the only place in the ancient world that was true. But you start redefining what those terms mean. We're going to be inclusive, but now we're going to change what it means. And the church was radically inclusive of people, but it wasn't radically inclusive of sin. You know, we know this because the number one sermon topic for pastors for the first 5 centuries was to heterosexual men to not sleep with their slaves. You have to stick with your wife and not sleep with your slaves. That was the #1 sermon topic. So it included everybody, but then expected you to struggle toward holiness. And I liked what he said in here about holiness is not just giving up certain behaviors, it's striving toward a more integrated, holistic approach towards living. That was the journey you were expected to be on as part of the community. You weren't expected to be living it perfectly. You were being helped along that path, but you were exposed to be striving towards something different than what you came from. And not just saying, oh, let's take what I came from and baptize it. I like doing that stuff. Maybe I can keep doing it. Yeah. Anything else? I always want to do this for the people who are streaming this on the internet, or for the algorithm, or whoever comes across it later. The videos we show are from Patterns of Evidence. It's a great ministry to support. They do tremendous, tremendous work. I definitely recommend getting a download. And you can either get a subscription or you can buy individual downloads, and you can keep them in file if you're interested in these topics. It's a great ministry. It's just a movie. Actually, it's just movie making. So in general, their stuff is pretty solid, though. So. Just to go back to the letter of Thyatira before we jump into Sardis, and you probably noticed what he said, that Thyatira falls on the road between Pergamum and Sardis, so the letters are kind of following in order, so down that road. It's like you can read this one and then take it to the next church down the road. So the one who conquers, what do we have in our text here? You're going to receive what?
The
Morning
scepter
star.
crushing the pottery.
Yes. So that's a common image from the prophets. What's your biggest concern in the ancient world? As an average, normal peasant person?
Surviving, really.
Will I eat tomorrow, right? Will I eat tomorrow? And still to this day in the poorest parts of the world, even more pressing than food is?
Even more pressing than what?
Food.
Water.
Water, right? One of the ministries we've supported as a congregation is called Barnabas Aid, and 2 weeks ago I think we prayed for John Tufel. It's the first time he's been able to be back in India since COVID. And all his ministry does is go out to these really, really desperately poor places and dig wells so that the local community has fresh water. Getting fresh water for the day can oftentimes be the primary activity of a family because the water doesn't last. It goes bad so quickly. So you send your 8-year-old out on a walk by themselves, 10 miles round trip to go get fresh water for the day. That means that child's not being educated, because their job is to bring the water for the family that day. Water, and to a lesser degree food, was held in pottery. Pottery was a cheap is a cheap way to store things for a poor person, right? Obviously it's brittle. How many glasses did we break this summer when the kids were home? So the idea of an iron rod, typically if you have war come through an area, what gets destroyed first is the pottery and stuff like that, right? And it makes it hard living for the local people. There's also a reason why they would destroy the pottery, is because it has the decorations of the last ruling class, and they want to wipe that identity out and replace it with something new. So the iron rod represents a new rule coming and a strong rule. Okay, so that's those who conquer will be ruling in the new world to come. This is why, as we're going to see when we get to the heavenly worship, you're going to see them wearing crowns, like I mentioned in my sermon on Sunday. That represents rulership. Yep. And of course, what else? In addition to the iron rod?
The morning star.
Morning star. Yep. And we're, of course, we get mostly modern Christians get this from our hymnody. When the morning star shows up in our hymns, it always represents Jesus. Isn't this a terrible, terrible, kitschy version of Jesus as the morning star? But I couldn't find another one. There's probably better ones since I did this one now that AI is a thing. But Jesus rising as the morning star, the first star you can, or the last star you can see rather at sunrise, right? Kind of thing. That's normal. We get that in our hymnody today, where we get this. So you'll be given that connection with Jesus. All right. So let's start our way into, or do you guys have lunch now? Do you have to rush
We
to
have lunch and mine says 10 minutes, but it's my clock.
No, that clock was wrong last week. I let us out early. So I guess I wanted to make sure. So we're going to stop.
We have
at
10 minutes. We will have lunch, yeah, because then we have a class at 1.
Yeah, yeah. So we'll stop at noon, but we've got 10 minutes at this point. My clock says 12 minutes.
My clock always goes, sometimes I pull it out.
Yeah, absolutely.
12 minutes.
So we're going to start Revelations chapter 3. Revelation chapter 3, not Sundays. And to the angel of the church in Sardis write, the words of him who has the 7 spirits of God and the 7 stars. I know your works. You have the reputation of being alive, but you are dead. Wake up and strengthen what remains and is about to die, for I have not found your works complete in the sight of my God. Remember then what you received and heard. Keep it and repent. If you will not wake up, I will come like a thief, and you will not know at what hour I will come against you. Yet you have still a few names in Sardis, people who have not soiled their garments, and they will walk with me in white, for they are worthy. The one who conquers will be clothed thus in white garments, and I will never blot out his name from the book of life. I will confess his name before my Father and before his angels. He who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. All right, and Keith, we always start with the same question here. What grabs your attention? So we're on the group's agenda as we go forward.
We're busy reading that.
Yeah, see, anything that grabs your attention, you can go with.
Okay, the line, you have the reputation of being alive, but you are dead. I think in so many churches that they kind of have everything that looks kind of great from the outside, and spiritually they're truly dead inside.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, and in some cases, you think that the church is, it's there to kind of impress other people, but there's really nothing there.
Yeah, it can be very much, my favorite phrase for that from the New Testament is a whitewashed sepulcher, right? Looks great on the outside, but yeah, spiritually abusive inside, or just hollow and empty, nothing going on but a pretty building with a big endowment.
In this one, he seems to be beginning a little bit different than the first 4. The first 4, he kind of said nice things about them, positive things. This one seems to hit right at you right away.
Yeah, it's the letters almost seem scaled that way. Laodicea will be our last letter, and he will reserve his strongest words against Laodicea for sure. I mean, this one still has a remnant. There's still a group there that are still following faithfully. Yeah.
What are the 7 spirits of God and the 7 stars?
That's a callback. Yeah, that's a callback to the beginning of the letter, where you see him the vision.
It's been too long since.
Yeah. What else?
I mean, at least there's a few people in Sardis.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
I think it's interesting to see when you think about that, of God knowing, who, that you have a whole church of people, and then yet there's major issues, and yet God knows everyone's heart within a congregation. So the whole church is being judged, but then within that, God still knows the faithful people who walk.
Yes. Which is one of the reasons why, at least Lutherans don't tend to use the language of saved in the past tense, right? There's a misunderstanding of the parable of the wheat and the tares. Y'all remember that one? Jesus tells the story. There's a field that a king sows, and the enemy comes and sows poison. The tares are poison. They look just like wheat, though, right? And so his servant says, should I rip it all up and start over? And he says, no, let them grow to full size. When they get to full size, you can tell which is which. but when they're growing, you can't. So there's a misunderstanding of that parable in certain theologies where they say that they'll talk about a true church and a false church or a secret church or something like this. The church is the field. It's different than the world. The world is the, for lack of a better word, it's the wilderness, right? Then you're evangelized, and that's the field now. Now we're being called. Now we're, depending on which metaphor you use, there's the field, there's the vineyard, these are the people who claim to God, but not everyone's going to grow into the reality for which they have been reassigned or claimed by Christ, right? Some people will throw that away, unfortunately. So for me, what's interesting about this, as he's using here in this imagery, draws on what parable? The thief in the night,
Yeah.
right?
Be alert, be awake.
Right, exactly. What's interesting, though, if I'm remembering correctly, maybe I'm not, I think when he uses that language that the day will come upon you like a thief in the night, I think that's in the parable of the 10 virgins, where some of them are prepared for him to arrive and some aren't. And so